Take a deep dive into the beauty of competition, the power of sports to shape us, and the danger of letting the game become a god.
Well, good morning, Northland. Hey, it's good to be with you. We are diving into our TED series. Now, this is a unique series that we do every single summer. So this is my fourth summer here. The first summer, we actually did our doctrines, our primary doctrines of what we believe here as a church. Then the following summer, we actually did the church and a divided democracy, so faith and politics. Last year, we did faith and technology. This year, we're doing faith and sports. Now, if this is your first time here, I normally do not preach the way I'm about to do so for this series because we have a part 1 and a part 2. Normally, I would tell you, open up your Bibles to so-and-so, and then we would just walk through the passage. Well, what we do in this series is I'm trying to construct. So imagine that you're going to college and you sign up for a faith and sports college class. So I've constructed this series the way I would actually teach a college level class of how faith, our Christian faith, intersects with these big topics in our life. And so what I'm wanting to actually give you is an actual theology of how you ought to, if you are a child of God, if you're a Christian, how you ought to think Christianly, biblically, theologically, and missionally about sports. So I'm just telling you, it is a unique series. And so if you're like, man, how do you preach the Bible? I am, but not the way I always do, okay? So if you want to know more about my style, you can go back and watch the last series that we did, Genesis, Making Sense Out of Mission. Because here's the question that we're trying to tackle. How should Christians think about and engage with sports? Now, I actually love sports. I actually grew up playing sports. I brought some pictures with me just so that you can see me as a young little boy. This is me here in my shades. I was a cool boy right then. This is my dad. He coached. He went to be with the Lord back in December. This is me, again, my dad. And this is me in high school. Baseball was actually my first love. Any baseball people out there? Okay, I know we got a Knicks fan over here. I saw him from the backside because the Knicks won the NBA championship for the first time in 53 years. Congratulations to our Knicks fans. All right. But baseball was my first love, but I also played other sports. I played soccer. I played golf. Actually, golf became the primary sport that I played later in high school and went to college playing golf. And then my wife, she played multi-sports, and so she was able to find, my wife isn't this old. She's like, all I got is a black and white picture. But anyways, I said, well, give it to me. But she played volleyball, she played basketball, she ran track, she didn't run track, she did the shot put in college. So we, both my wife and I, we grew up playing sports. And then even our children, we have 3 children. I actually coached at least a couple of my children. I couldn't coach my daughter in cheerleading. I knew nothing about cheerleading, but they all played sports at some level. And so we really do love sports. And then even now, recreationally, I actually participate in sports. I do triathlons. So I've done the Ironman. I've done a couple of half Ironmans. I've done a full Ironman. I'm doing a half Ironman in September. Like I said, I love golf, so I play it recreationally. I thought when I moved to Florida 4 years ago, I was going to be playing a lot of golf. That just didn't happen. You keep me too busy to play a lot of golf. So that's great. But I love sports. And in fact, I actually know that a lot of Americans love sports as well because 80%, look at this, 80% of Americans participated in at least one sport, fitness, or outdoor recreational activity over the course of a year. So that's 250 Americans that have been active in some kind of form of sport. So that's 8 out of 10 people, all right? That's crazy. Now, maybe for some of you, you're the 2 or the 20% that, don't do anything, with sports. Here's what I would say. You can fill what we're constructing over the next several weeks, you can fill in with any other hobby that you love, okay? But here's the definition of sports. So a sport is a structured activity along with some form of governing rules involving physical skill, technique, and or physical exertion, and it can be done individually or with a team, and that seeks to achieve some measurable outcome or victory. So when we're talking about a sport, that is our definition. So when you look at that definition, there are at least 5 main elements that we can take away. So sports are structured, they got rules, they're physical, there's this kind of physical, maybe even a mental exertion. You can do it alone or you can do it with the team. And then there is an aim, there is a goal that you have in that sport. Now, what constitutes a sport? Well, here's a list, and it's not exhaustive, but this is a pretty exhaustive list. You got running, long jump, you got soccer, or in the world they call it actual football, but then we got American football. Badminton, anybody out there play badminton? Yeah, that's what I thought, maybe one of you. Pickleball, how many pickleball people we got? That's the largest growing sport, or the fastest growing sport. Okay, you got fencing. I don't know if anybody out there does any fencing. Where my curlers at? Where are my curlers? See, we're in Florida. You probably don't do curling. But where are my cornhole people at? Yeah, that's the redneck sport right there, baby. I'm telling you, they put 2 toilet bowls out in the field, and they're like, you know what? I think we can do something with this. And so anyways, but... Esports, that's actually a growing sport. It's the digital side of sports. And then where are my chess people at? Where are my checker people at? All right. So we can call that a sport. Not a lot of physical exertion, but a lot of mental exertion goes into chess, cards, checkers. So this is again, not an exhaustive list, but at least a pretty doggone long list of what can constitute as a sport. Now, as I was preparing for this particular talk, I was like, man, I would actually love to do a research study on the history of sports and how sports have evolved throughout human civilization. So let me show you actually how sports have evolved throughout human civilization. So we actually have the first set is really around 3000 BC to 800 BC. Now it can go a little bit earlier, but these are the earliest accounts of sports, is that you got running, you got wrestling, you got boxing, you got javelin throwing, some form of polo, and some form of gymnastics in the earliest days of human civilization. And they looked at sports as more recreational, more survival, and more warfare. Like these were really preparing them for warfare. When you think about, javelin throwing, that's really more survival because they had to hunt for their food. So when you think about the earliest days of sports, you got to think of recreation, survival, and warfare. But as humans evolved, you get into the Greek civilization. And in Greek civilization, between 800 BC and 150 AD, they actually saw sports as competition and games for glory and fame, and it was religious in nature. So the Greeks, as they had conquered the known world at that time, they created the ancient Olympic Games. And these games were in honor of Zeus. And so they took a lot of these older forms of sports, like javelin throwing right here, and then you got boxing, wrestling, and they just actually made it into competition and actual games for glory, fame, and for Zeus. So that's how the Greeks looked at sports. Well, anybody in history know who conquered the Greeks? Anybody? Rome conquered the Greeks. And then now you have from 250 BC to around 500 AD, you have the Romans. Now they are taking sports and they are adapting it to their culture, to what they want. And so they created sports as entertainment. That's the whole idea of the Colosseum. They're going to create sports as an entertainment for politics. Because what they would say is, hey, if we can entertain the people, we can get their mind off of life, and we can, in some sense, have this political power and control them to do whatever we want to do. And it was also a way for them to show their power around the world. And then they even used slaves as part of their sports and their entertainment. And so this is why I had to put Maximus in the movie Gladiator, where he says, "Are you not entertained? entertained. Like that's Rome. That's how they looked at sports, as primary entertainment. Well, then you begin to see, again, the evolution of sports into the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages. And so from 500 AD to 1500 AD, sports really became very segregated, where you had the nobles, they did these sports. You had the commoners, they did these sports. They saw it as recreational. It was very brutal, and it was also for warfare training. So let me show you some of these. On the top screen, this is what they called game ball. Game ball was between two teams. They usually would have two villages that would come together, and they would have a ball, and they would try to move across the line. So it's where we get football, whether it's soccer or American football. So that's game ball. It was very violent, very few rules. Like you can punch people, you can body slam people, you do whatever you want to do as long as you got that ball across the line. So think of even rugby today, okay? Obviously you still got archery, you got jousting, you got the board games that really come around the Dark Ages. Then you have the nobility, they're hunting. And then you have a sport called shinty. So again, they have now sticks and a ball, and very few rules, but you got to get the ball, you know, where again, a goal, pass the line, something like that. But they would beat people with the stick. It was pretty funny when I was reading about shinty. So it's where we get hockey, field hockey, all of that. All right, so that's the Dark Ages. So Dark Ages, very dark. They're bloody, they're brutal, because they're going to win at all cost. So now as you continue to see the evolution of sports and history, you get into the modern era. So basically from 15 AD to present. And there are actually various elements to modern day sports. Well, the first element is recreational. So people just have fun playing sports. So basketball, pickleball, football, bowling, golf, and all of the other kind of sports that you saw listed earlier. So recreational. But not only recreational, the second element is competitive. Think about all of the competition that we have today. You have youth sports, extremely competitive. Then they move into college. And then we have professionals, and we have all sorts of professional leagues and even minor leagues under the professional headings. Then we have these global competitions, the Olympics, and then the World Cup. Now, as Lauren just found out, very few of you in Dolly watched the World Cup because we're American football people, not global soccer football people. But nevertheless, it was pretty interesting to see USA beat Paraguay 4-1 a couple days ago. That was undoubtedly a historic thing. I learned. Again, I didn't know, but I learned. So anyways, but we have competition in our modern sports. The third element that we have is glory and fame. So in every sport, even in our youth sports, we have glory and fame. Think about it. If you played sports growing up like I did, we grew up I wanted to pitch like Greg Maddux. I wanted to bat like Barry Bonds. I wanted to play football like Peyton Manning. I wanted to play golf like Tiger Woods. Because the higher they went, the more glory and fame they received. And then even now, college has completely changed with this idea of glory, fame, and wealth. Now we're even paying college athletes $4 million to play a sport. And so now you have these high school athletes going, man, I want to be the next Arch Manning. I want to get paid those big bucks going to college. So we got recreational, competitive, glory, fame. Here's a fourth element of modern day sports, and that's entertainment. The sports entertainment industry is a multi-billion dollar industry. In fact, globally, it is a $3 trillion industry when you look at the entertainment realm of sports. Watching it, going to the stadiums to see, buying the apparel, all of this entertainment. This is what sports is. This is an element of modern day sports. And then the last element that we see in modern day sports is political. Sports have become political in our modern day. These are all of the articles, just recent articles over the last couple of years and even more. how professional sports leagues that embrace social justice causes, power play, assessing the role of politics in modern sports. Do politics belong in sports? There's this movement that will just say, be quiet and just play ball. I mean, so you have this movement because now people are using sports as a political tool to be able to influence the masses. So now when you look at the history, the evolution of sports, here's what you got. The history of sports has converged to give shape to modern sports. What I've wanted to show you is as sports evolved throughout the history of civilization, today modern sports have taken elements of each of those eras of history and they have combined them into what is today modern sports. Now, the reason why I set that up is because this is how the world thinks about sports. But this is what the Bible would teach us. We just don't do what the world does just because they're doing it. We just don't participate in how the world participates just because this is what they do. So this is the question, and actually there are two questions that I want to pose. That if you are engaged in sports, it could be recreationally, maybe you have a teenager, maybe you have a grandchild, and they're in competitive sports, and they're trying to get to college, and maybe you know somebody that's in the professional realm of sports. Here are the two questions that believers, that Christians, I'm not asking the world to ask this question. They don't know Jesus. They don't believe the Bible is their authority, but we do. So these are the two questions. How should Christians think biblically, theologically, and missionally about sports? And then how should Christians engage and actually play sports? And this is a big word, but it really means Christ-centered. So Christocentrically means Christ-centered. So how should we engage and play sports centered around Jesus for the good of the world and the glory of God? So those are really, really important questions. And I think a lot of times, and this is why I love these series, even though they're unique to how we teach, but I love these series because they're supposed to make you and me really think deeply and Christianly about what we do in the world and how we do it. So I'm going to pray for us, and then we're going to enter into part two. Father, I do pray right now that you would be glorified in this series, and that Spirit of God, that you will move in our life, and that you would give us eyes to see and ears to hear and a mind to understand, a heart to receive, and really the powers, the Spirit, the power to actually engage and play sports in a way that glorifies Jesus for others' good, that we actually would engage in a way that is different and distinct than the world. And we pray this in your name, amen.
Take a deep dive into the beauty of competition, the power of sports to shape us, and the danger of letting the game become a god.
All right, so in part one, we ended with these two questions, all right? So these two questions, how should Christians think? And then how should Christians engage and play? Now, if we're going to start somewhere, we have to start with faith and our faith framework. So if you're new here, we've actually constructed a faith framework for us as believers to help us think through faith. Now, I want you to realize that every single person living on planet Earth, regardless of their religion, whether they are atheist, agnostic, or Christian, or Buddhist, or Muslim, every single person has a faith framework, and it works like this. The first element of the faith framework is worldview. It's literally how they see the world. Now, when it comes to any worldview, though, and particularly the Christian worldview, here's what we're going to ask. How should we see sports? How should we see sports? What is the way God sees sports, and how should we then see sports? And then the second element of our worldview is mission. It's the purpose of life. So when you're looking at your faith framework and you apply it to sports, you're asking yourself, why do I play sports? And so we're constructing the actual reason for us engaging in soccer, engaging in American football, engaging in pickleball, whether recreationally, competitively, professionally. The third element is ethics. There is a right way to engage sports, and there is a wrong way to engage sports. There's a right way to play those sports. There's a wrong way to play the sport. So there's good and bad. There's right and wrong. And then there's the fourth element of maturity. Now, full disclosure, this is pretty funny. So I grew up in the South, and we used to have church leagues. I'm sure there are other church leagues around. I used to get kicked out of church leagues. Like I really did. We had a basketball league, and when I was 13, 14, 15 years old, my youth pastor would actually kick me out of the gym because he's like, we don't act like that. And I was uber competitive, and so I would yell at the ref, who was my Bible study teacher, and go, there, you missed the call, man. And then my youth pastor, Shane, said, sit your butt down. And then when I kept running my mouth, he's like, all right, you done. But here's the thing, I'm 43 now, I don't do that anymore. I've matured. So that's how it works, all right? That's how that works. And then the primary center element is who's at the center. Who's at the center? Now, in other people's faith, they have a different center than Christians should have. At the center of an atheist is themselves. The center of an agnostic is themselves. Even in other religions in the world where they have to work for their salvation, the center is themselves. Okay, but for a Christian, the center that actually influences and impacts all of those elements is Jesus. Jesus is the one who gives us our worldview of how we should see sports. Jesus is the one that gives us the mission of why we play sports. Jesus is the one that helps us understand the ethics of how we engage, how we play sports. Jesus is the one that grows us and matures us as we grow in our human development, and it comes out in the way we play sports. So you need your faith framework, because your faith actually impacts and influences every single area of your life. So where do you locate sports in the Bible? Where's the origin of sports in the Bible? Well, let me tell you where you would put it. You would actually put it in Genesis chapter 1. Now, that should be a no-brainer for those of you who are Northlanders. That's the origin of the heavens and the earth. It's the origin of humanity. It's what we're called to do. But here's what Genesis 1 says. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, what we have established through our Genesis series is that in Genesis 1, when God creates the heavens and the earth, here's what he's ultimately doing. He's creating a material place whereby he can bring heaven, the unseen realm, into the seen realm. So in Genesis 1, what God is doing when he's creating the earth, he's creating the material domain whereby he can extend his kingdom from heaven to earth. And then in verse 26, here's what we read. Then God said, let us make mankind in our image and in our likeness. So this is the primary way that God is actually going to bring heaven to earth. He's going to bring heaven to earth through image bearers, AKA also known as human beings. So you and I, we were created in order for God to be able to extend his kingdom from heaven to earth. Now the question then is, okay, so if human beings have been created to actually to be the conduits by which God brings heaven to earth, how do we actually reflect God's kingdom? How do we reflect who he is? How do we bring his presence to bear in the material world? And here's how. God actually blesses them in verse 28. And he said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. So basically what he is saying is that this is how you're going to bring heaven to earth, and how you relate and how you create, how you subdue the raw materials, and then how you operate, how you steward and manage everything that I have given you. Now you have to remember too, in all of this, this is God's mission. God's mission from the very beginning is to create, and then it is to redeem, because mankind sinned against God. They rebelled, committed treason. They supremely loved themselves rather than God. As a result, we are now sinners by our very nature. God is on mission to create, to redeem one people from all peoples, to reflect his glory in all spheres of life. And when that happens, we are actually conduits to bring heaven to earth. So now when you look at these three elements of humanity, I'm going to put them on the screen. These are the elements of how we actually bring heaven to earth and how we relate. And you hear me say this all of the time. How you relate to your spouse, that is an element whereby you are called, if you are a follower of Jesus, you are called to reflect who God is. Not the world, but God. How you relate to your children, how you relate to your parents, how you relate to your friends, how you relate to your coworkers. Like all of these relationships, we are to bring heaven to bear in those relationships. And then humans create. This is subdue. This is to take the raw materials that God has created to actually enhance what God made from nothing, and we make something from what God made. Now, the reason why I have that outline, this is where the origin of sports lie, in the element of create, in the element of subdue. The third element is operate. So it's now that we have all of the things that God has made, now we're enhancing his creation. We're going to take those things that we create, we're going to take our time, our talents, and our treasures, everything that God has given us, and we're going to steward them as resources that God has given us to actually glorify him for the good of others. That's literally what it means to be human and thus to bring heaven to earth. Now, again, we're talking about faith in sports. We've located sports under create, under subdue. So let me talk to you about how this works out in sports. So we're going to talk about subduing in sports. So when you look at Genesis 1, obviously God in his mind had creation in his mind, heavens and earth, and then he goes to work creating it. So same thing happens with us when we subdue the raw materials. We actually have this ideation that happens where we're thinking of, okay, what can we do with these raw materials? What can we do with wood? What can we do with animal skin? What can we do with stone? What can we do with the legs God has given us? What can we do? When we start ideating in the mind and we're creating in our mind sports. And then you move from ideation to actual creation. You actually begin to create the culture. So let me show you what this looks like. So as you create culture, then what you're going to do, you're going to take the raw materials that God has made. Listen, we can't make raw materials. That's why they call them raw. So we can actually take the raw materials and we can actually go to work creating something. So we can actually go to work creating the bow for archery and the arrows. Or we can go to work creating sandals and shoes to help us run. Or we can go to work creating sticks from wood or plastic or whatever it may be so that we can create the equipment. And then we can take the leather and we can create the ball. So these are what we call cultural mandate elements, where we are cultivating the raw materials and we're actually making something of the world. So then you move from ideation to creation to actual formation. So this is actually where now when you look at what God has done, God created the heavens and the earth, but then he's going to give shape and formation through creating the systems and structures that create the order in which life will be lived. Same thing happens in sports. You move to formation where you establish the structure, the rules, the outcome, and the technique. So think about golf. So golf has a lot of rules, a lot of structure to it. But then even when you think about the golf swing, there are actual proper techniques to enhance the play of golf. Now, when you take all three of those things and you put them all together, this is what you get. You get games in the mind, then you start creating the equipment to be able to play the games, And then you create the rules, the competitions, and the technique to actually give structure and formation to the games. That is actually where, if you wanted to put sports in a theological category of where they originated, you would put them in Genesis 1, verse 28, specifically under the subdue category of where human beings are to subdue the raw materials to make something of the world. Then the other two elements, though, of humanity come into play. Now that we have a category called sports, where there are games that have structure and rules and techniques, then we now move into this other category of relate. So now in the play of sports, we are actually to bring heaven to earth in how we relate to everybody engaged in sports. So our teammates, and here's what I know. I've coached everywhere from a 5-year-old to a 14-year-old. And one of the things that I have to constantly tell these kids, these students, is encourage one another. Don't belittle, them. Don't go, man, I can't believe you stink. I mean, Jesus is not doing that to us. There's a way we ought to treat our teammates. Like when they're batting, we ought to cheer for them. Even if we're sitting the bench, we ought to be for them, not against them. All right. So we're doing that. Opponents. Can I give you a pet peeve of mine real quick? I don't care if you want to do it. I'm going to tell you anyways. So my kids play, they play baseball, they play football, and I've seen this in football. And again, this is JV varsity level. When the opposing team kicks a field goal and they miss it, our team at a Christian school cheers. Why are we cheering for the mistake of a 15 and 16-year-old? Why? Is God going up there going, man, yeah, he missed it. Whoa, no, he's not. So if God's not doing it, why are we doing it? It's okay to cheer when your player makes a good play, but why do we cheer for the mistakes of teenagers and adolescents? Because that is not how God in heaven is cheering. Coaches. How are coaches being related to? Are you giving them a piece of your mind? You better play my kid. Oh! Or are you saying, hey, because I've had to do this. Literally, I've had to do this. I send them a very pleasant email. I do. So I have my wife read it. And I just say, can you give me your coaching philosophy? Because it's a JV team. You're losing by 10 every game. Why isn't there kind of justice and fairness and equity in a JV formation league? Can you help me process this? Because you're a Christian coach. Because if you say it's all about winning, I can promise you there are certain levels of sports that God's like, it's not all about winning. It's about forming that child more into the image of Jesus. Okay? How you treat officials. I've actually umped before. When I was 18 years old, oh my gosh, I got some abuse. And they called me names I couldn't even tell you here. Fans. Like, how do we interact with fans? Like this is how, if we are called to bring heaven to earth, yes, we are called to bring heaven to earth, even in the arena of sports. And then operate. This is the third element of what it means to be human and bring heaven to earth, our body. You do realize that the way that modern sports have evolved, we are literally abusing the bodies of adolescents and teenagers. What are we telling them? Time, talents, treasures, our money, influence, opportunity. How do you steward wins and losses? Because you realize that losses can actually be more developing than wins. See, these are the elements that we have to think deeply about, but Christianly about. Not worldly about, but Christianly about. Now, when you look at Genesis 1 and you look at the end of chapter 1 in Genesis, this is where God is leading all of creation. Let me show you. God saw all that he had made and it was very good. Meaning that everything that he had made functioned according to his design for it. And as a result, God looked at everything and said, man, everything is flourishing. And that's how you know heaven has come to earth, when things are flourishing because they are functioning according to God's design for it. So here's really the principle coming out of Genesis 1. When God is glorified, there is actual human flourishing that happens. And I want us to realize that sports can be an arena whereby human flourishing is experienced and God is glorified. In fact, this idea of human flourishing, it is a really big topic today. It is so big, Harvard even has created the 6 markers of human flourishing. Let me show them to you. So Harvard, they want to see humans flourish. And so they actually have done a research project, it's been a global project, of what are the 6 markers, or what are the markers whereby humans need these markers in order to experience human flourishing. And here they are: happiness and life satisfaction, mental and physical health, meaning and purpose, character and virtue, close social relationships, financial and material stability. Those are the 6 markers Harvard says go into human flourishing. Well, let's think about the role sports can play in human flourishing. Sports can provide joy and enjoyment. Sports can actually sharpen the body and mind of individuals. Sports can give you a purpose beyond performance. Sports have many good characteristics that can teach you good character and virtue, like discipline and endurance. Also, sports can provide a place for community and belonging to happen. And then sports can actually even provide an opportunity and provision for stability, for material stability. So there are really good qualities of sports and how sports can actually bring about human flourishing. But let me give you the current landscape of sports in America. Let me show them. So the current landscape of sports in America, I think, really do reveal how sin distorted God's glory and thus work against human flourishing. Because while I've been talking about Genesis 1 and where you would locate sports, what I haven't talked about yet is Genesis 3, where Adam and Eve sinned. So when Adam and Eve sinned and they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the tree that God told them not to eat from, here's what happened. They shattered the image of God on human life. Meaning that humans no longer can be the conduit that brings heaven to earth, because they have become so man-centered, and where they do not love God supremely, they love themselves supremely, thereby they cannot bring heaven to earth. Here's what they've actually brought. They brought hell on earth. So where God has created us to bring human flourishing because of sin, we actually bring about human floundering, and it's the unravel of order. And what I actually think that has happened throughout the evolution of life is seeing all of these elements of sports that could be good, but because they are done by sinners that don't know Jesus, then what happens is that it brings about more floundering and fracturing in society rather than flourishing in society. Let me just show you. This is not exhaustive, but it shows you at least some of the areas where we are floundering. Let me show you. So in distorted relationships, because this is what sin does. Sin distorts our humanity of being able to bring heaven to earth, to reflect God's glory. So these are ways that we distort relationships in sports in America. What about parent misconduct? I mean, parents are losing their ever-loving mind at sports. I'm talking about recreational YMCA sports. Like, they ain't Messi, they ain't Ronaldo. I mean, give the kid, give the ref a break. Did you know this? 80% of new referees quit within the first 2 years. You know why? Because of parental abuse. 50% of coaches say managing disruptive parents, that's the most difficult part of their job. And then there is even a coaching crisis in terms of relationships. Here's the coaching crisis. Most youth coaches receive little or no training in child development. Many of them, even only a third, know anything about the sport they're coaching. So you have the majority of them that know nothing about coaching that particular sport, and you got the majority of them that know nothing about actually child development, how you actually ought to coach a child. Class division. Participation rates are dramatically higher among children from households earning $100,000 versus lower income houses. So here's what the research says. If you make $100,000 or more, if you're basically somewhere in this middle to upper class, your child is probably going to be active. If you're under this threshold, then your child is probably going to be inactive. You know probably the reason why? Because of money. They don't have the money and the access to be able to get into recreational sports. Okay, so this is just distorted relation. Again, this is not even an exhaustive list. We would be here way longer than 25 minutes if I gave you an exhaustive list. Here's distorted culture. So this is what we have created. Remember, what God creates is supposed to bring flourishing. Look at this, the attrition rate of children. 70% of children quit organized sports by age 13. You know what the number one reason is? They don't have fun. And the reason why many of them don't have fun is because of their parents. Like this is not me saying this is the research saying this. So what we have created in America, 70% of children are like, I don't want anything to do with it by the time that they reach 13. Mental health, 33% of elite athletes experience mental health challenges. 47% of high school athletes report symptoms of depression. Why? Why would many of those student athletes be depressed? Is because they have tied their performance to their identity of who they are. So when they don't perform, they think they're a bad person. And then here's one too, church becomes optional. Church becomes optional. In 2024, Lifeway Research did a study that said, hey, how many times a year, and this is a survey to Christians that attended evangelical churches. Okay, so they're asking, when should you miss corporate worship? When should you miss a weekend? Should you miss it never, once or twice a year, a few times a year, or many times a year? 53%, 9% didn't know, all right? 9%, so you can't, so if you added 9% to that, that's 62%. 53% of churchgoers say it's okay to miss a few to many times a year. I can promise you, listen, please hear me. I am not being legalistic about this, but I can promise you, in the mind of God, he would never want us to create anything that would actually compete with the main thing. And then we got Americans going, well, yeah, I think a few times, yeah. And then a few times becomes many times. Y'all all right? So that's a distorted culture. The third is a distorted stewardship. This is how we manage the cost. Families spend approximately $40 billion annually on sports in America. So the spend rate of Americans when they have a child in a competitive sport. Americans will spend somewhere between $40,000 and $65,000 per child on that competitive sport over that child's lifetime. Now, the number is for the recreational component is only $20,000. Okay, so a parent will spend roughly approximately $20,000 just on recreational sports, not competitive sports. Now, here's the return on investment. Only 7% of high school athletes play in college. So if you have 100 high school football seniors on a football field, only 7 of them will actually play football in college. And out of that 7, only 2% receive any kind of athletic scholarship. So I just want you to see the discrepancy here. If you're trying to, well, I want my kid to go to college playing sports. The chances of them going to college and playing sports is very thin. And then the body abuse. Now we're having 13 to 14-year-olds. They're getting Tommy John surgery. They have stress fractures from overusing their body. And then they got mental fatigue and burnout from playing sports nonstop year round. What if you ran your car at 6, 7, 8 RPMs the entire time you're going on your way home? What's going to happen? You'll burn your car out. But this is what we're doing to a lot of our kids today in American sports. We're burning them out. So when you look at human flourishing and human floundering, this is the list that you have. This is what human flourishing should produce in sports, but this is a lot of what we are producing in sports today in America. Quitting, burnout, identity crisis, abuse of bodies, class divisions, parent toxicity, coaching deficiencies, and financial excess. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, because you ought to be thinking. You're like, well, come on, there's got to be some positives, and you're thinking about all the things that you're pushing back on. And let me give you some of those things that you're pushing back on. Maybe you say there are a lot of people participating in sports, including millions of children, which you would be correct, and that you would say most of them have a positive experience. Well, I mean, I don't know if I would say most of them, and especially when you think about 70% of kids by the age of 13 drop out of organized sports. That includes recreational organized sports. Now, you can also, you could say, well, sports are one of the last places where people from different races, different political views, family structures come together with a shared common experience. Yeah, maybe that's part of why all the fighting. I don't know. Without sports, Americans would be even more unhealthy. I'd give you that. And sports still helps shape character. What character are you shaping is what I would ask. Let me get really at the issue. Let me show you the issue. Here's the root issue. The issue isn't sports. I've told you that. Man, sports is I really do believe that sports is part of what it means to be human. It's an element. It is an arena of what it means to be human, where we can bring heaven to earth. But what really is going on is a heart issue. It's a heart issue. So I'm going to give you 2 formulas so that you can begin to look at these formulas to see where your heart is. And again, if you're a parent, I think you need to start here. Where is your heart in advocating for your child to play sports and helping your child, encouraging your child to play sports? Like we need to look at these things. Here's the first formula. The first formula is function plus identity equals broken image. And here's what I mean by that. Function. What does it mean to be human? There's 3 functions of what we said the Bible teaches of what it means to be human. Relate, create, and operate. If you start with your function, what you do, and your function leads to your identity, and it becomes who you are, you will have a broken image. And see, what I think has happened in really the history, the evolution of sports, and definitely here in modern America, we take the element of creating, relating, and operating, and we let that become who we are. So kids they're looking at soccer is who they are. Football is who they are. Baseball is who they are. Field hockey is who they are. And when that happens, you equal a broken image. Because that's not who we are. As believers, that's not who we are. Then you get into the real, the true formula, and here it is. Identity. You start with identity. Who humans are. We are God's children. We are God's creation. We are representatives to bring heaven to earth. That's who we are. And then we use what we do, relate, create, and operate to reflect God on earth. And when we do that, we actually reflect the character, the nature, the wholeness, the beauty of God. And that is the formula that should be driving all of our life, even our life in the arena of sports. Will you stand with me? We're going to pray and we'll send you out.